Media lies about Kamala Harris being the border czar.
This whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe.
They started their administration. Kamala Harris came into office making promises, and she kept those promises to open the American southern border. They stopped deportations on day one. They stopped construction of the border wall on day one. We see the border wall sitting here, ready to be completed behind us, and that can't happen because of Kamala Harris's administration. They reinstated catch and release, and they stopped remain in Mexico. So all of these asylum claimants who come to our border, they can now get released into our country because they're not forced to stay in Mexico while we adjudicate their asylum claims. And we have to remember that as terrible and idiotic as these policies were, they cause real human beings to suffer. A lot of you know my story, and I have been a little kid waiting at the bedside of his mother, angry that his mom took something that she shouldn't have taken, but praying to God, please, Jesus, let her wake up. And the unfortunate truth is because of the poison that Kamala Harris has let come into this country, there are a lot of those prayers that won't be answered. There are a lot of parents that won't wake up because when you take fentanyl, you don't wake up. It takes your life. So there are a lot of kids out there who have been deprived of second chances with their moms and dads. There are a lot of moms and dads out there who will never see their kids walk down the aisle because of what Kamala Harris has unleashed at this border.
Hey, how are you? Hi there. Good to see you. I'm glad that you're down here. First trip to the border.
Yeah, I've heard this is one of the more dangerous spots too. So.
I was just going to ask you, and if you've been informed that this is one of the areas along, especially in the Tucson sector, that is exploited by the cartels. Sure. A lot of drug smuggling comes through here. We literally watch scouts up on that ridge on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Does that concern you? Does it worry you coming down here or being in this spot? And also, does it concern you that 3.5 years later, this is where we are?
Well, it worries me that Kamala Harris, who is our border czar, has let this happen. But look, if you're not willing to come in and see the most dangerous parts of the border, you're not ready to lead this country. Yeah, I'm really concerned about what's going on here, but I'm concerned because it's caused a lot of fentanyl to come into our country and kill our citizens. You heard the chief earlier say that about 25% of the fentanyl coming into our country is coming through a 20-mile track that we're standing right in the middle of. It's a horrible tragedy for the American people. We have to stop it, and with better policies we could. I mean, look, some things are difficult. Border enforcement is common sense. You just have to empower the Border Patrol to do what they need to do to stop this terrible crime from happening. If you do that, you solve 90% of the problem.
So what's the first order of business? Day one, what do you do on the border?
You know, I talked a lot to the Border Patrol guys today just about what is most important. The thing they kept on saying is the Remain in Mexico policy. That is what forced asylum claimants to stay in Mexico while those claims were adjudicated. We know the cartels, but also a lot of other fraudsters use the asylum process, the broken asylum process, to come into the country illegally, to go all over the country to deal drugs and so forth. I think that's important. Obviously, you have to re-implement aggressive deportations. If people are coming into the country illegally, you have to be willing to send them back, or they're just going to keep on coming. And then I think finally, you've got to end this crazy catch and release system where people fly into Kansas City from Central America, they get released all over the Midwest. That's terrible, and it also, again, invites people to come in and break our laws.
And with the conversations we hear often is close the border, close the border. We hear former President Trump say it often.
Yeah.
What does a closed border look like under a Trump-Vance presidency?
Look, I think it's very simple, actually. It's number one, you finish construction of this border wall. You've got slats of border wall here that the Biden administration is letting rot in the desert instead of put up to actually make our citizens safer. I think it's re-implementing deportation so that when people do come across illegally, you send them back and say go through the proper channels. You're never going to, of course, eliminate every illegal border crossing, but if you look, I don't know if we still have the chart up here, but if you look at that red line there, that is as bad as it got under the Trump administration is still way better than the low point of the Biden administration. We just got to get back to common sense. It's not that hard.
So what if President Trump taps you to be the border czar? What do you do?
Well, I do basically the opposite of what Kamala Harris has done because she's made the problem worse, and we're going to make the problem better. One of the things that I sort of these guys drove home today, just talking to them about the border problems, is you need somebody to coordinate the response of the federal government. If you're going to send people back, that involves the State Department. If you're going to empower Border Patrol, that involves the Department of Homeland Security. If you have kids coming across, that's HHS, right? So you have multiple departments that need to be coordinated and empowered to do the job of enforcing the people's border. You just have to do it, right? It's not rocket science. Re-implement deportations, re-implement Remain in Mexico, empower the Border Patrol. It's a simple matter of willpower. It's not a difficult thing.
One of the conversations that President Trump regularly has, and I'm sure you're aware of this one, the biggest mass deportation in history will happen under his administration. How do you plan to do that when the 1.34 million that have a final order of removal probably don't have addresses because a lot of them didn't show up to court, and the rest of them that have walked in have a notice to appear and legal due process under our Constitution to ride that out? So how do you actually carry out this deportation?
Well, I think the first thing we have to remember is that it's a lot cheaper to deport people than it is to provide them with free housing, free medical care at taxpayer expense. And I think you start with the most egregious violent criminals, the people who have committed acts of violence in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think that you make it harder to employ illegal immigrants to begin with, and then a lot of people will go back. And I think that's where you start. You see where you are at the end of that process, and then you implement further policies beyond that. But I think it's so funny the Democrats say mass deportations, that's completely impractical. What's impractical is letting 20 million people come into your country. You can certainly deport some of them. Let's start there and see where we are.
So he would have to probably sign an executive order in order to remove those people with a notice to appear. Would you support that?
Of course I would. We have to deport people who are in this country illegally. If you're not willing to send people who come into the country illegally, you don't effectively have a border. They're just going to keep on coming if they know they get to stay.
And we've seen the numbers for July already. It is looking like it's going to be Biden's lowest month since he took office. Does Kamala Harris get any credit for that?
Well, I think the problem with it, and again, Kamala Harris has been the border czar despite some of the media lying about it, is that's only counting the people who come in through legal ports of entry. If you take the total sum of people coming through non-ports of entry, the unknown gotaways, and also the people who are coming through customs, I actually think the border numbers are as bad or worse as they ever have been. It's a shell game. They are trying to manipulate the numbers so the media gives border czar Harris a free pass. The truth is that it's as bad as it's ever been.
Now, when it comes to what's in the news lately, we've been talking a lot about Venezuela, the TDA gang that is running rampant around our streets. We've seen it in many cases. How do you work with Venezuela and China, these countries that refuse to take deportation flights? Venezuela hasn't taken a flight back from us since February. How do you strengthen those relations? How do you work with them to get a handle on that and to get that working relationship together?
You use the economic might of the United States of America. President Trump showed this in a number of his economic relationships and dealings with China. They need access to our markets. The Venezuelans need access to our markets. If not, their economy is destroyed. So you have to say, we're going to destroy your economy unless you start helping us enforce our laws. It's a very common sense trade, and I think they're going to make it.
Sorry, one more question. Now, when it comes to CBP One app, the app heard around the world, right?
That's right.
Obviously, that has become kind of what the Biden administration says is a legal pathway. They say it's been working for them. As you mentioned, those are kind of what is called legal entries through the ports, which we're looking around 1,700 a day. Would you keep that process? Would you keep the CBP One app program?
Absolutely not. I think it just facilitates massive illegal immigration. It allows them to pretend that illegal immigration is actually not illegal. But I think if you look at how it's been used across the world, it has been treated and viewed as an open invitation facilitated by digital technology to come in and break our border laws. It's a total disaster. We've got to stop it.
The other numbers you got to keep in mind are CHNV, 30,000 a month, my friend, are coming in on the parole program.
That's crazy. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
All right, bye.
Thank you.
All right.